A wave of fever rose from the docks of Messina in October 1347, and Europe never recovered. Genoese ships, heavy with grain and men, unloaded not only cargo, but a new strain of Yersinia pestis that would prove unlike any before it. Within weeks, the disease surged through Sicily, spilled into Calabria, and by winter had blackened the streets of Naples, Florence, and Paris. For centuries, the Black Death was remembered as a single catastrophe. In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened and why the real history unfolded differently. The plague that arrived that autumn did not burn out after 3 terrible years. In our world, the pandemic waned by 1351, leaving a scarred continent but allowing populations to rebound. Here, the bacteria mutated in Messina into a chronic form capable of persisting in rodent reservoirs and re-emerging each spring with a predictable rhythm. Every year, from 1348 onward, towns along the Mediterranean coast awoke to a familiar dread: fever, buboes, death sweeping through markets as the first warm breezes stirred fleas from their hiding places. The pattern was relentless, and it forced societies to confront mortality, not as an exception, but as a constant backdrop. What no one at the time could foresee, what would remain hidden for generations, was how this perpetual scourge would reshape institutions that had never imagined governing under such a shadow. By 1353, the Holy See, still ensconced in Avignon, issued the Bull of Eternal Vigilance. The Papal Council demanded that every Christian fast during the months when plague customarily resurfaced, April through June, and that churches hold penitential processions to invoke divine mercy. The decree was framed as a spiritual bulwark against an unseen enemy, yet it also served a pragmatic purpose, limiting gatherings at precisely the time when flea-borne transmission peaked. Monks in cloisters across France and Italy began sealing their chapter houses, allowing only essential alms to pass through narrow apertures. In England, Archbishop William of Wykeham ordered that all parishioners attend daily mass in silence, believing that reduced speech would diminish the spread of miasma. The bull created a continent-wide rhythm of enforced abstinence, intertwining faith with public health in a way never seen before. The decree left a question lingering in the minds of chroniclers: would religious authority alone be enough to curb a disease that could lie dormant for months and strike without warning? The answer would soon demand a more secular response. In 1360, the Guild of Plague Physicians, a loose association of physicians from Bologna, Paris, and Basel, convened in the hall of the University of Padua. Their purpose was to transform the frantic, superstitious treatments that dominated the early years into something systematic. The Guild produced the first preventive manual, a manuscript that outlined cordons sanitaires, physical barriers around infected towns, and advocated for an early form of inoculation using blood from recovered patients. The physicians argued that those who survived carried a protective humus that could be transferred to the healthy through controlled transfusion. Though crude and risky by modern standards, the practice saved lives in several Italian city-states, where municipal councils permitted it under strict supervision. The manual also prescribed regular cleaning of streets with ash and vinegar, an early nod to sanitation that foreshadowed later state interventions. Yet the Guild's recommendations sparked fierce debate among clergy who saw bloodletting as sacrilegious. As the physicians pressed forward, a new tension emerged. Could science carve out its own authority amid a world still dominated by papal edicts? The answer would hinge on the power of an emerging secular bureaucracy. The Holy Roman Empire, wary of the economic paralysis caused by recurring plague seasons, responded in 1368 by establishing the Imperial Sanitation Corps. Modeled after earlier Roman public works, the Corps was a state-run agency tasked with city-wide waste removal, rat control, and enforcement of quarantine zones decreed by local magistrates. In Nuremberg, soldiers equipped with iron rakes scoured alleys for dead rodents, while in Strasbourg engineers designed rudimentary sewer grates to keep rats from flooding the streets during heavy rains. The Corps also issued standardized plague passes that allowed merchants to travel only after presenting proof of a clean carriage and a recent health inspection. The creation of this bureaucracy marked a turning point. For the first time, secular authority claimed responsibility for protecting public health on a scale larger than any ecclesiastical order could manage. Yet the core faced resistance from the Free Cities League, whose merchants feared that strict controls would choke trade routes essential to their wealth. The Free Cities League, comprising Venice, Genoa, Lubeck, and Bruges, met in 1372 to negotiate a compromise with imperial officials. Their solution was a network of plague corridors skirting the most heavily quarantined zones, allowing merchants to bypass strict controls while still adhering to basic sanitary measures. Ships were required to dock at designated inspection ports where crews underwent fumigation with saltpeter smoke before proceeding inland. These corridors preserved the flow of silk, spices, and grain that fed both aristocratic courts and starving peasantry. However, they also created a new class of plague couriers who specialized in navigating the ever-shifting map of disease hotspots. Their knowledge became a valuable commodity, and their letters, filled with observations about flea activity, rat migrations, and local health ordinances, circulated among scholars across Europe. The League's adaptation raised another unanswered question: would commerce eventually dominate public policy, or would the relentless mortality force even the most powerful merchants to accept tighter controls? The answer unfolded as religious reform began to echo the same anxieties. By 1517, Martin Luther, having witnessed generations of his parishioners lose loved ones to the unending spring plagues, seized upon the disease as evidence of divine wrath. In his theses, he argued that the Church's failure to eradicate the pestilence revealed a deeper corruption, a world out of sync with God's will. His critique resonated across a continent where every village bore fresh graves each year. The Reformation ignited not only theological debate, but also practical reforms. Protestant cantons in Switzerland instituted community health boards that combined spiritual counsel with sanitation measures, effectively merging the earlier papal fasting mandates with the imperial sanitation corps protocols. In England, Henry VIII's break with Rome was partially justified by a desire to free his realm from what he called the Pope's ineffective pestilence policies. Luther's use of the plague as moral proof created a feedback loop. Religious upheaval accelerated the secularization of health measures, while the unending mortality kept societies in a state of heightened vigilance. Yet the question remained, could scientific inquiry finally break free from both ecclesiastical and political shackles? The early 17th century saw a new generation of scholars turning to observation rather than doctrine. Johannes Kepler, while calculating planetary motions, kept meticulous records of plague incidents across German principalities, noting correlations between temperature spikes and outbreak severity. His correspondence with the Royal Society in London eventually reached Robert Hooke, who, in the 1660s, performed one of the first microscopic examinations of flea vectors in a London laboratory. Hooke's sketches revealed the flea's spiny mouthparts, leading him to propose that controlling rodent populations could directly reduce human cases, a hypothesis later confirmed by Imperial Sanitation Corps field reports. These early epidemiological models, though rudimentary, laid groundwork for what would become modern public health statistics. Their work sparked a quiet revolution. Universities began offering courses on pestilence dynamics, and city councils consulted mathematicians to predict the timing of spring outbreaks. Yet despite these advances, the plague's chronic nature meant that no single breakthrough could eradicate it entirely. Instead, societies learned to live with a predictable, seasonal threat. By the 19th century, industrialization reshaped European cities into dense factories and tenements where fleas thrived in unprecedented numbers. The Imperial Sanitation Corps, now renamed the Central Health Authority, mandated compulsory health inspections for all urban dwellings. Inspectors measured rat burrow density, tested water sources for contamination, and enforced weekly street sweeping schedules. The plague persisted as a seasonal background condition, its mortality rate reduced but never eliminated. In Paris, the 1854 cholera outbreak prompted Baron Haussmann's massive redesign of streets, inadvertently improving airflow and reducing flea habitats. In London, the 1866 Great Rat Hunt saw tens of thousands of vermin exterminated, leading to a measurable dip in plague deaths that year. These incremental victories cemented the principle that public health required constant vigilance, a lesson traced back to the mutated strain that first arrived in Messina. Modern Europe's legal frameworks for disease control, from quarantine laws to vaccination mandates, all bear the imprint of centuries spent adapting to an unstoppable recurring enemy. Looking back across 600 years, one sees a continent forever altered. Population growth stalled, social hierarchies hardened by perpetual loss, and institutions forged in the crucible of endless mortality. The world we know, where the Black Death faded into history, could have been a place where humanity learned to coexist with a plague that never truly left. In this alternate timeline exploration, we see how the relentless pulse of disease can shape law, faith, commerce, and science, reminding us that the paths not taken are as instructive as those we walked.